If you find value in these psychological insights that illuminate the path of individuation, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with others seeking to discover their authentic selves. Your engagement helps this wisdom reach those who need it most. Together, we embark on a journey into the depths of the psyche, where the treasures of self-knowledge await those courageous enough to descend. Self-respect begins where self-deception ends. Many walk through life carrying the heavy burden of unworthiness, a shadow aspect that grows stronger in darkness and weaker in the light of consciousness. This shadow feeds on your denial, creating a complex that distorts your perception of self, like a dark mirror reflecting only your inadequacies. The first step toward genuine self-respect requires the courage to face this shadow directly. When you turn away from your perceived flaws, you paradoxically strengthen them. The rejected aspects of your nature do not disappear, but instead operate autonomously from the unconscious, sabotaging your conscious intentions like trickster figures. From ancient mythology, consider the ancient alchemical principle of solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. The unworthiness you feel must first be dissolved through conscious acknowledgement before it can be recombined into a more integrated self-image. This psychological alchemy transforms the lead of self-rejection into the gold of self-respect. The collective myths speak to this truth. Recall how Persephone's descent into the underworld was necessary before her return could bring renewal to the earth. Your own descent into the shadow realm of unworthiness, though frightening, is the necessary precursor to the rebirth of genuine self-valuation. The hero must always face the dragon before claiming the treasure. You must confront your unworthiness before discovering your inherent worth. Notice how this shadow manifests in your dreams, perhaps as a neglected child, a wounded animal, or a threatening figure that pursues you through labyrinthine passages. These dream images are not merely random productions of a sleeping mind, but symbolic representations of disowned aspects of your psyche, calling for integration. When you turn toward these figures with curiosity rather than fear, their energies become available for conscious use rather than unconscious sabotage. The journey toward self-respect parallels the process of individuation, that sacred path toward psychological wholeness. When you abandon your authentic nature to conform to collective expectations, you sacrifice the very essence that deserves your respect. The psyche rebels against this betrayal through dreams, synchronicities, and neurosis, all messages from the unconscious demanding integration rather than repression. Consider the acorn that contains within it the pattern of the mighty oak. Your psyche similarly contains the pattern of your potential wholeness, what I have termed the self. This innate blueprint for your psychological development cannot be replaced by external models without severe consequences to your sense of worth. The collective often demands conformity at the expense of authenticity. This sacrifice creates a spiritual poverty that no external achievements can compensate for. The banker who ignores his artistic nature, the artist who abandons her work for financial security, the healer who denies his own wounds, all suffer from this fundamental betrayal of the self. True individuation requires differentiating yourself from the collective while simultaneously maintaining a meaningful connection to it. This paradoxical task mirrors the developmental challenge of the child who must separate from the mother while preserving the bond of love. Self-respect emerges from this delicate balance, neither fusion with nor rejection of the collective, but rather a conscious relationship to it. The ancient alchemists depicted this process through the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites. The king and queen, sun and moon, sulfur and mercury, these symbolic pairs represented the opposing tendencies within the psyche that must be united for the creation of the philosopher's stone. Your own journey towards self-respect similarly requires the reconciliation of opposing aspects of your nature: the desire for connection and the need for independence, the creative impulse and the critical faculty, the spiritual aspiration and the embodied experience. The persona, that mask we present to the world, often becomes mistaken for the self. True self-respect emerges only when you recognize the difference between who you present yourself to be and who you truly are. This dissolution of identification with the persona may feel like death, but it is merely the necessary sacrifice for rebirth into authenticity. The persona develops as a compromise between the individual and society. It serves an important adaptive function, allowing you to navigate the social world. Yet when you over-identify with this mask, you become alienated from your deeper nature. The businessman who cannot remove his suit even in intimate settings, the academic who cannot speak without jargon, the social media personality whose online image has consumed their authentic self, all suffer from persona inflation. The dissolution of the persona often comes through crisis. The midlife transition frequently initiates this process, as the adaptations that served in the first half of life become insufficient for the second. Dreams may portray this as death, nakedness, or being exposed in public, symbolic representations of the ego's fear of persona dissolution. Yet this dissolution, painful though it may be, clears the way for genuine self-respect. Only when you can distinguish between the social role and the authentic self can you begin to value yourself beyond your utility to others. Like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, the authentic self must break through the hardened shell of persona to unfold its true nature. Consider the ancient mystery religions, where initiates symbolically died to their old identities before being reborn into new awareness. The Christian baptism, the shamanic dismemberment, the alchemical mortificatio all point toward this necessary dissolution of the constructed identity before the emergence of the authentic self. Your own journey towards self-respect may require similar symbolic deaths: the loss of a career that defined you, the end of a relationship that shaped your identity, the failure of an endeavor around which you built your sense of worth. In the aftermath of such losses, you may experience what the mystics have called the dark night of the soul, a period of disorientation and emptiness as the familiar structures of identity dissolve. Yet it is precisely in this emptiness that the first glimmers of authentic self-respect can emerge, like stars that become visible only in the darkness. Within the psyche dwells an archetype of judgment, the inner critic that speaks with the voice of collective expectations. This critical inner figure often disguises itself as wisdom or protection, yet it undermines the foundation of self-respect. To master self-respect, one must engage this critical voice not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a complex to be understood and integrated. The inner critic has ancient roots in the human psyche. In primitive societies, deviation from tribal norms could mean exile or death. This internalized guardian of collective values served an evolutionary purpose, ensuring social cohesion. Yet in modern life, this archetype often becomes pathologically autonomous, attacking rather than protecting the individual. The critic speaks in absolutes: always, never, everyone, no one. It deals in black and white thinking that allows no room for the natural ambiguity of human experience. Its voice often carries the tone of significant childhood authorities, parents, teachers, religious figures whose judgments you internalized before developing the capacity for critical evaluation. Confronting the critic requires first recognizing its voice as distinct from your own. Through active imagination, you might visualize this figure and engage it in dialogue. What is its purpose? What does it fear would happen if it ceased its constant criticism? Often this dialogue reveals that beneath the critic's harsh exterior lies fear, fear of rejection, abandonment, or chaos. In mythology, this critic often appears as the stern judge, Minos weighing the souls in the underworld, Anubis measuring, the heart against the feather of truth, St. Peter at the gates of heaven. These mythic figures remind us that evaluation serves a necessary function in psychological development. The goal is not to silence the critic, but to transform its energy from persecutory to discerning, a mature inner evaluator that can assess your behavior without condemning your worth. This transformation often begins with compassion, not the sentimental kind that excuses all behavior, but the clear-seeing kind that acknowledges human limitation without judgment. Consider how you might respond to a child learning to walk. You do not condemn the child for falling, but encourage each attempt, recognizing that mastery comes through repeated effort. This same compassionate attention, directed toward your own developmental struggles, begins to transform the critic from persecutor to ally. Your deepest wounds contain the seed of your greatest strength. This paradox lies at the heart of the wounded healer archetype. Self-respect flourishes not from denying your wounds, but from recognizing how they have shaped your unique capacity for compassion and understanding. Your scars are hieroglyphs that tell the story of your becoming. The archetype of the wounded healer dates back to ancient Greek mythology in the figure of Chiron, the centaur who could heal others but not himself. This paradox reveals a profound psychological truth, that our wounds, when consciously engaged, become the source of our healing gifts to the world. Consider how the child who experienced abandonment may develop extraordinary sensitivity to the needs of others. The person who has navigated depression often develops unusual depth of empathy. The survivor of trauma frequently possesses an intuitive understanding of suffering that no academic training could provide. These are not mere compensations, but transformations of wound into wisdom. Self-respect requires honoring these wounds, not as deficiencies, but as initiations. In traditional societies, the shaman was often called through illness or psychological crisis. The modern individual likewise may be called through personal suffering to deeper self-knowledge and service. When you reject your wounds, you reject also the unique gifts they have bestowed. True self-respect acknowledges both your vulnerability and the strength that has emerged from it. Like the Japanese art of kintsugi, which repairs broken pottery with gold, highlighting rather than hiding the breaks, psychological integration honors the fractures in your life as the very places where the light enters. This paradoxical relationship between wounding and healing appears throughout the world's spiritual traditions. The crucified Christ whose wounds heal humanity, the Bodhisattva who transforms suffering into compassion, the wounded fisher king whose healing restores the wasteland. These symbolic figures point toward the transformative potential of consciously engaged suffering. Your own journey toward self-respect requires similar engagement with your wounds. Rather than hiding them in shame or displaying them in self-pity, you are called to alchemize them into wisdom. This transformation occurs not through intellectual understanding alone, but through lived experience, the gradual discovery that your greatest vulnerability, when fully embraced, becomes your greatest strength. The contrasexual archetypes within, anima in men, animus in women, must be honored for self-respect to flourish. When these inner feminine or masculine aspects remain projected outward, we become dependent on others for completion. True self-respect requires withdrawing these projections and embracing the wholeness that comes from psychological androgyny. The anima, as the feminine soul image in a man, manifests progressively through 4 stages: Eve, purely biological; Helen, romantic aesthetic; Mary, spiritual devotion; and Sophia, transcendent wisdom. A man who rejects his anima remains cut off from his emotional life, intuition, and capacity for relatedness. His self-respect remains incomplete, for he has rejected a fundamental aspect of his wholeness. Similarly, the animus, as the masculine spirit image in a woman, develops from physical power to intellectual autonomy to spiritual meaning. A woman who denies her animus may maintain outer relationships while lacking inner authority, seeking validation externally rather than developing the inner logos that provides spiritual backbone. The integration of these contrasexual elements does not mean becoming androgynous in a literal sense, but rather achieving psychological completeness. When a man can value his sensitivity without feeling diminished, when a woman can assert her power without apology, true self-respect becomes possible. This integration manifests concretely in dreams, where the contrasexual figure gradually transforms from threatening or seductive to companionable. In waking life, it appears as a growing comfort, with aspects of yourself previously rejected as belonging to the opposite sex, whether vulnerability and receptivity in men or assertiveness and independence in women. The alchemical texts depicted this process as the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites, symbolized by the sacred marriage of king and queen, sun and moon. The hermetic vessel in which this union occurred represented the psyche itself, containing the tension of opposites until transformation occurred. Your own psychological development similarly requires containing the tension between masculine and feminine aspects of your nature until a third, transcendent position emerges. This integration appears throughout world mythology. Shiva and Shakti in eternal embrace, the yin-yang symbol of Taoism, the androgynous divine beings found in many mystical traditions. These symbolic representations point toward the psychological truth that wholeness requires the integration of apparent opposites, not their elimination or domination of one by the other. Beyond the ego lies the self, that organizing principle of the entire psyche that transcends yet includes all opposites. Self-respect in its highest form is recognition of this inner divinity, not as an intellectual concept, but as a lived experience. The ego that acknowledges the self as its true center gains a profound humility that paradoxically strengthens genuine self-respect. The self appears in dreams and visions as a supraordinate personality, the wise old man or woman, the divine child, the mandala, or other symbols of totality and wholeness. These images emerge spontaneously from the unconscious, particularly during significant transitions, pointing toward the innate pattern of wholeness that guides the individuation process. When the ego identifies with the self, inflation results, the messianic complex that mistakes personal consciousness for divine awareness. Yet when the ego denies the self, alienation follows, the spiritual emptiness that characterizes much of modern life. True self-respect emerges from the middle path, the ego's conscious relationship to the self. This relationship might be conceptualized as that between the moon and the sun. The ego, like the moon, has no light of its own but reflects the light of the self. When properly aligned, the ego neither claims the light as its own achievement nor denies its participation in that light. It recognizes itself as both distinct from and a manifestation of the greater whole. In practical terms, this alignment manifests as a peculiar combination of humility and dignity. The person centered in the self can acknowledge both limitations and gifts without exaggeration in either direction. They can receive criticism without devastation and praise without inflation. They can act decisively while remaining open to the guidance that comes through dreams, synchronicities, and the subtle promptings of the unconscious. The world's spiritual. Traditions have expressed this centered state through various symbols. The Buddha, seated at the axis mundi, Christ as the mediator between heaven and earth, the Taoist sage aligned with the Tao. These figures represent not merely historical individuals, but psychological possibilities available to each person who undertakes the inner journey. Your own connection to the self may manifest through dreams of quaternity, the fourfold patterns that appear as mandalas, squares, crosses, or other symbols of wholeness. It may emerge through synchronistic events that reveal the meaningful connection between inner and outer realities. It may develop through creative expression that seems to flow from a source beyond the personal ego. However it appears, this connection provides the foundation for the deepest form of self-respect, one based not on achievement or approval, but on authentic participation in the mystery of being. The ultimate expression of self-respect manifests in living your personal myth, that narrative pattern that connects your individual life to the collective unconscious. When you honor your unique path, the external world responds with meaningful coincidences, synchronicities that affirm your alignment with deeper purpose. True power emerges not from domination, but from this resonance between inner and outer realities. Every life contains an implicit myth, a pattern of meaning that transcends the merely biographical. This personal myth connects to the great collective. Myths, while expressing itself through the particulars of your individual existence, the hero's journey, the search for the beloved, the descent and return. These universal patterns manifest uniquely through each life when consciously engaged. Synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of inner and outer events, serves as confirmation that you are living your myth. When you make a decision aligned with your authentic path, the world often responds with seemingly miraculous confirmations. You think of someone long forgotten, only to receive their call. You contemplate a new direction, and a book falls from the shelf, opening to the very page that addresses your question. These are not mere coincidences, but moments when the artificial boundary between psyche and matter becomes transparent. Living your myth requires attentiveness to these synchronistic events. They serve as signposts, confirming when you are on your path and warning when you have strayed. Like the ancient practice of divination, synchronicity reveals the underlying patterns connecting your individual journey to the cosmos. This mythic living differs fundamentally from ego-driven ambition. The ego seeks to impose its will upon reality, forcing outcomes and manipulating circumstances. Mythic consciousness instead attunes itself to the deeper currents already moving through your life, riding these currents rather than fighting against them. The ancient concept of dharma in Hindu and Buddhist traditions captures this alignment between individual action and cosmic order. When you live according to your dharma, your unique purpose and duty, you participate in the maintenance of the entire universe. Similarly, the Taoist concept of wu wei, action in accordance with nature, points toward effort that flows with, rather than against, the current of existence. True self-respect flows naturally from this mythic consciousness. When you recognize your life as the expression of something greater than personal desire or social expectation, you accord it the respect due to any sacred text or ritual. Each decision, each relationship, each creative act becomes meaningful not merely for its external consequences, but for its participation in the unfolding of your personal myth. Consider how the greatest figures in history have embodied this mythic consciousness. Gandhi living the myth of non-violent resistance, Mozart channeling music that seemed to come from beyond himself, Mother Teresa enacting the myth of compassionate service. These individuals did not merely perform roles, but incarnated archetypal patterns, allowing the eternal to manifest through the temporal. Your own journey may not lead to world recognition, yet it holds the same potential for meaning and dignity. When you listen to the subtle promptings of your dreams, when you follow the thread of sincere interest despite practical concerns, when you honor the unique combination of gifts and limitations that constitute your individual existence, you participate in this same mythic consciousness. From this participation emerges the deepest form of self-respect, not the inflated pride of the ego, but the quiet dignity of authentic being. Self-respect, properly understood, reveals itself not as a static achievement, but as a dynamic process, a spiral path that continuously returns to familiar terrain at progressively deeper levels. Each circumambulation of this spiral brings new shadows to integrate, new aspects of the self to discover, new challenges to the persona, and new possibilities for creative synthesis. The ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring, its own tale captures this endless process of psychological transformation. The end continually feeds back into the beginning, death into rebirth, consciousness into unconsciousness, in an eternal cycle of renewal. Yet unlike the closed circle, the spiral suggests evolution. Each return occurs at a new level of integration. This understanding liberates you from the tyranny of linear progress, while affirming the value of continued psychological work. The shadow material you thought resolved will return, but your capacity to engage it will have deepened. The anima or animus integration you achieved will face new challenges, but your relationship to these inner figures will have matured. The connection to the self you experienced will seem lost, but your faith in its reality will have strengthened. True self-respect embraces this cyclical nature of psychological development. It finds dignity not in perfection, but in the willingness to engage repeatedly with the fundamental challenges of human existence. Like the mythic hero who returns from the adventure transformed, yet ready for the next call, the individual who has developed genuine self-respect stands prepared to enter the unknown again and again, carrying the wisdom of past journeys, while remaining open to new discovery. In the Kabbalah, the tree of life represents this continuous interplay between different levels of consciousness. The lightning path of descent from Kether to Malkuth mirrors the ascending path of return, creating a dynamic flow between spirit and matter, unity and multiplicity. Your own psychological development follows a similar pattern. The descent into darkness becomes the precondition for ascent into light, only to begin again at a higher level of the spiral. In this continuing spiral lies the ultimate paradox of self-respect. It is both the foundation and the fruit of the individuation process. Without some initial spark of self-valuation, the journey cannot begin, yet only through the journey does self-respect mature into its fullest expression. May your own spiral path lead you ever deeper into this mystery, ever closer to the wholeness that awaits not at the journey's end, but in each moment of conscious engagement with the infinite complexity of your own psyche.